that was right next to what we termed a dock pest reserve. And we found that we looked at where our house is situated. We look out over the Ngāhere and you could see a lot of the canopy starting to disappear and a lot of little sticks showing and that sort of stuff. And we were a bit concerned. And when we thought we'd better get in there with some cyanide and knock some possums down, we ended up getting, I think, around 120 just in the valley in front of us, and that's only about 30 hectares. So we knew there was a problem. Wellington was a problem. We spent our time clearing up our own place, and it was almost fruitless because just within months it would be full of pests again, in particular possums. And at that point we didn't understand multi-species pest control and all of those other things. So we got on top of things a little bit more in our own place, started varying things around, and then we decided we'd start this trust up because we realised that the forest really needed some funding to be able to get that looked after. To explain this forest, 25 years at the time of no pest control. And I know Graham, it's so good to meet you today because I follow you on Facebook and I'm just so blown away by the mahi you've done, mate. It's phenomenal up there. So all credit to you and your team and the people you've got together. So it's a real motivating thing for me and for us. I'd also just a quick brief thank you to some of the other speakers too, because they've raised and highlighted exactly the same issues that we're dealing with as well. So we basically started doing trapping for a few years, got kind of rats down to 28% in the tracking tunnels. It wasn't particularly effective. We weren't really tight with what we were doing. We were kind of learning as we go. Pest control sort of got really, people got really engaged with it, partly to do with the Predatory 2050 goal. But in the last sort of 10 years, the whole thing around cats as well, 1080, all of those things that we mentioned here today already, have brought this stuff into the community forefront and to have conversations about that. And that's really what needs to happen when there's the big challenges ahead of us. So I'm hoping this is going to work because I always feel like I'm going to point up there, but I'm going to point to the computer and do it right. Okay, so now I realise which slide we're on. So we're on the first slide. Okay, so I just want to move this along a little bit if I can. Right, Wellington, we do have a problem. So does this look familiar to anyone? Graham? Okay, I'll tell you where this photo was taken, because it's not our forest. I'm being a little bit political. This is actually Fiordland. So there is a problem across New Zealand where there is no pest control, and everyone here knows that. And it's really, really important to be able to identify what those problems are, but one of the obvious ones is the destruction of the canopy, in particular by possums. And obviously Graham's problem, and thank God we do not have this issue up north yet, which is the problem of deer. So this shot was taken just literally a few days ago. So this is our forest. So it's a lowland forest. It's 2,000 hectares, so it's not a big place, but we have the same challenges. So we have tōtara dying, being eaten from the top down. We have the understory being cleaned out by possums and rats, eating the seedlings, of course. We don't have goats and we don't have deer, and so we are really, really fortunate from that respect. But our forest is fairly, it's got some lovely large pockets of native trees, and it's really worth protecting. So what we basically did was we had this goal of a 250 hectare chunk in the centre of our forest, and I'm going to give you some context of that forest down the track. But basically, if you look at some of the names on this particular, basically we had this field trial efficacy testing. We wanted within 12 months using the AT220 trap, we wanted to basically trial that trap to see whether we could get possums and rats down to 5%. So that's obviously our BMI for possums as a 5% residual trap catch, and also the 5% for trapping for rats. So we're hoping to be able to keep that for 12 months. So anyone here have experience with the AT220 trap? Yep, so lots of hands. Yep. So there's been some challenges, as a lot of you would know, and but there's also been some amazing results as well. So we got this amazing woman called Gabe Hayes, and this is where the front cover of this actual field trial happens, was in the Bay of Plenty. So we had Gay draw up our plan, which was really, really awesome. So this is again effective learning and sharing of information between the regions. So we got this incredible plan, 75 basically 75 meter spacings for an A220 block. We actually originally were starting to do that as a toxin base station layout, and suddenly in some drunken moment we thought, hey, let's try this with A220s because we can create a field trial and hopefully we get people supporting us with some funding to do that, because field trials are always useful to get funding because they provide information for people beyond the existing space that's being protected. So we went for some funding, and fortunately we went through community conservation funding, got some money for that. We also got support from Princess Cruises, who's a cruise ship that comes into the bay up north, and they were helping reintroduce some funds back into the community as well. So creating some jobs and hopefully getting rid of some possums and rats. So yeah, fairly intense. So this all had to be trapped and cut, and a whole lot of work done to be able to put these traps in. In terms of the numbers, we had 268 hectares, we had 58 k's of traps being cut, 530 odd AT220s. We had around $300,000 budget. We actually came in on budget with that one, and it was a setup cost of around $550 per trap. So ballpark cost of around $1,100 per hectare to do this. Okay, so what we really wanted to do also, we had, I'm a computer programmer, so I sit down in my little office and I tap away and enjoy doing that side of it. It's quite creative for me. So what I really wanted to be able to do was kind of take an existing system that we had and be able to apply that to what we were doing in the forest. So we set up a lot of our jobs and a lot of our work management and workflow on the system that we had running. And then we were able to track things like installations of traps and a whole bunch of, like who's doing what lines, all of it was managed, and it was a lot simpler and cheaper to do that, and try and keep on track of it, making sure that we're not getting behind and making sure that we're on keeping up to what our milestones were. So as part of that planning process, this was a really useful tool, and there's a lot of tools out there these days that can do this sort of stuff. So in this particular picture here, we've got a whole bunch of greens, which are jobs that still need to be done in terms of installations or even luring or whatever we've got behind that. And the white ones are the ones that have been finished and completed. So these kind of maps, although this is a later project, these kind of like almost real-time maps of the work that's been completed is incredibly motivating for people, and that's what really needed to happen, because it can get quite emotionally challenging when you're trying to, you're rummaging through the forest and it's cold and it's dark and you're really not sure how your progress is going and you're kind of feeling over it. These kind of things where you can say, shit, tomorrow I'm going to go and nail that little block of green up the top there. And so it's a way of keeping all of the people in the project motivated, which is what we found the most use for it, really. So we had some team members, once we got these traps in and they started to catch some pests. We've got our young fella Archie, who's now 16, I think, and he's in the forest doing some other work for us. So what we did was we went around, we wanted to observe what we were catching and paint the ones that we could see, because if cats and pigs hadn't come along and cleaned them up, then we didn't want to recount them next time we came around. And we did this every 6 weeks. So we went into the forest and literally just spray painted them. And yeah, it's incredible to see all these dead animals at the bottom of these traps, because for years and years, we had to, we were just doing it monthly in the existing trapping area. And the maggoty, the big ball of maggoty rat that sits in the trap when you pull it out, that gets pretty tedious. So to see these ones just dead on the ground, Man, what a mental change where all you're really doing is reluring and putting batteries in, and you know that that trap is operating, minute after minute. It's operating in the forest and continually killing. And so that was the most motivating factor for us to go with this project and to really try out the ATs. So super glad that trap has come on the market. So what we wanted to do, and you saw Archie there, we actually set up, as a computer programmer, I'm not totally up to date with everything, but I have been playing around with a thing, if you can remember what this is called. It's called a progressive web app. And so a progressive web app is like an app that you download from the Play Store, but you don't need to do it from the Play Store. You can literally go to a browser website and it will install like a native app on a phone, and it works on almost all phones. So I haven't had a problem yet actually installing this. So we created an interface into that previous system you saw, which had all the job management. So that job would be something like a count up and check trap line during the AT220 process. You could start and record your time, much like Trap NZ and some of the other programs. And then you'd work through your different trap lines and you'd collect and count the number of animals we had at the base of the thing. And all this was just done on anyone's cell phone. So they can run it offline, it was no problem, and then it would just sync back to the master system up in the cloud. So why I mention this is it's really important. It's not expensive development to do this necessarily. So the great thing about all these new technologies coming out is that a lot of it is a lot cheaper than it's ever been. So don't be afraid to start talking about these kinds of things if you want them. So just a quick little view through that particular app. This one we call BBA Trapper. So you could just count the number of possums by tapping some buttons. The beauty of this particular thing is that you can add a field if you need it, not in field, but the management can do that, and they can just chuck that in there. You do not need a programmer to add that new field of information that you want to collect. So we were able to say, for example, when we found that the AT220s had lids coming off when the mechanism was closing, and the lid would pop off, then we were able to record which ones were doing that in the field, and that was a 2-minute addition of a field in the actual form on the app. So really, really simple to add new fields, and therefore you then collect whatever data you want depending on your project. So it's not tied to the kind of potential risk of things like Trap NZ, where there's a lot of people wanting a whole lot out of it. This you can create out of it what you want. You can make the decision around what information you want to collect. So we've been using it for now installations of bait stations, around what we see in terms of whether we see rat sign, mouse sign in the bait station, and we just add a new field, or even just the type of bag we've been putting into bait stations, to hold some of the lure. We've been recording some of that information as well. So it's really, really flexible from that point of view, and it was really useful. The other beauty of this one is if you came across a problem or a staff member was in the field and they're like, oh shit, this trap's got a mesh damage, or you've got a broken pump or something like that, you can create the job for the next round at the point that you're at the work site. So that then gets shown in a list the next time you go on there. So you can see in this particular screen, we've got to take the staple in for this trap, got to maintain, replace it, find the trap out. And so that just gives a summary of the line, and so you know what gear to take in when you go and do that line, and you don't forget anything. You make sure you've got all your tools, you make sure you've got everything you need, but you don't need to take too much. You can just take what you need. And then as you go in, then you can just tick these jobs off, and they get automatically synced and then ticked off at the end of the program at the end of the session that you've gone into the forest for. So it's a way of kind of keeping on top of things without the overhead of a lot of management, where you've got wet bits of paper, pencils, scribbles, cross out bits, pen blurred, then paper lost, people forget, all of that stuff happens. It's all happening at the point that you're at the trap. So we've found it really, really good compared to how we were operating. So it emails the team leader of the progress. It provides a summary for the contractors' invoices too when we're doing that. So they love it because they just cut and paste what they've done and then chuck it into an invoice. It also helps with the data collection and gathering for funding applications, which is really, really useful. Shows a degree of competency as well once you've got an organisation that's up and running. And as I mentioned, the biggest thing we found is that those maps provided a kind of daily motivator to get out there and keep going. So now the results of what we found using that system. So we, under the 220s, this is a nice little graph here, we found that in the very early months of January and February, we hit a huge number of rats and possums, or definitely possums first up, so possums is in the more orangey line. So around 350 possums in February underneath these traps. Now that's not accounting for cats coming and taking them away and possum hunters thinking this is a cheap and easy way to get some fur, and obviously pigs eating them as well. So we basically just counted what we saw, and we wanted to see whether we got some trends in that over the year that we were doing it. And as you can see, there's some significant drop-offs, but it's really interesting to see how many more possums we got in the first hits than we did rats. And so I don't have an answer for that, other than possums could be a more dominant animal, and keeping rats down and keeping rats away, and also in high possum numbers, there's potentially a lot less rats because there's less food. Other people here would know a lot more about that than me. But as you can see, by the time we got to the end of the year, we almost reported no animals under those traps, which was pretty exciting. So we did do monitoring. Our monitoring was pretty standard. So it was waxed eggs for possums, and so that was the BMI stuff, and then it was tracking tunnels for rats. And no, we didn't do it up the trees, which is hence the question I asked before to Sean about that. So we're quite keen to start looking at how we can make sure we're targeting chip rats. So just to give you a quick little overview, this is a little patch of forest that we're doing. Our control area is obviously there on the left-hand side, and where we have the traps on the right. So left-hand side, no pest control for nearly 30 years. Right-hand side, we've got the ATs going hard. So BMI, right, started off, the November quarter was before we set the traps in play, and we were tracking in the no control area at around 95% for possums, around 75% in the AT220 area. We do account for that a little bit because the AT area is actually next to where we do our trapping area, so there was probably a natural impact from where we had been taking the possums and rats out. But over that period of that year, clearly you can see that the red area in the back is the control site where there's no pest control going on. That stays exactly the same. Where we're getting the results is in the AT area, and by February we're getting down to 5%. So that was super exciting. That was better than we were doing with obviously trapping by hand. And we're getting near to that point where we can start thinking about bringing back something like hawkapple, right? So that's huge. That's the kind of real big gold stuff. So if we go back to rats, then we were actually only tracking around 45% in, I haven't changed those colours in there, but the one at the back is obviously the control area, and so those rats stayed pretty high and right up to 70% for some of those quarters. And you see them disappear in August, November, down to near zero. And then again, that was super exciting for us. When we first started this project, we didn't even know whether rats were going to be knocked out by the ATs. So that became a really super cool effect of what we'd managed to achieve. Now, one of the benefits of the results of actually seeing these numbers come down was this incredible increase in weta in the tracking tunnels. So that is one of those sort of instant results, instance within a year. So that's the kind of stuff, Graham, man, you're going to see happen straight away. It's just so awesome. So, look out for even the most basic, the little weta in there and see how you go. And so obviously that was a huge kind of like surprise. We weren't expecting that at all. Then one of the other things we managed to do with some of this information that we were crunching from the system was that we were able to do some beautiful heat maps and start looking at where our possums were being caught and where our rats were being caught. And so our possum counts in Q1 and Q2, you can see this pretty intensive around the areas where there's no pest control, but actually up in that corner, in the top kind of right corner of the AT group, that's where we've been doing the trapping manually. So you can see it did have an impact. It had an impact over the years in a kind of like a halo effect in that area. So it had been dragging some of those possums in. As we go into Q2, it gets a lot more exciting. We're starting to see a lot less animals, as I said, under those traps, but still around that ring area where there's no protection, all those animals coming in. Obvious stuff, but it's great to be able to prove it. And when you show funders these kind of photographs, it's really good for us, right? So when we go to Q3 and Q4, look at that, like such a dramatic change. And so again, we've created this kind of steel belt around the outside and the traps in the center are hardly being touched. So we're actually looking at this as a potential project to run around the outside of the forest at a really intensive amount of ATs that could potentially then stop the reinvasion back into the forest. I'll explain why, because we've received some funding after this particular project that allowed us to do the rest of the forest. So you'll see that in a bit. So our rats, this is just a little summary of rats. Rats are obviously a little more, the coverage of rats is a little more complicated and a little easier for them to get in through that steel fence. And so Q3 and Q4 still quite a clear showing that those rats are coming in from the outside. Still pretty exciting to see that on a piece of, on a map. So mission accomplished almost. Can we keep those rats down? One thing here, this is the Brax of the Kiki. We had never, ever seen this in our forest before, and one of our people that were going in and doing the trap maintenance, the AT maintenance, took photographs of this, took a piece of this back to the hapu, to his aunties who had not seen this plant in 30 years. So those are the kinds of rewards that come from doing the pest control, but it's more than that. It's what you get when you get pests really, really low. And so that has got to be the goal. How are we going for time? All goods? Yep, cool. I don't want to bore you guys too much with everything. So we'll get onto a little hot topic actually, which was about the ATU20 reliability. So I'm not going to shy away from it. It was hugely challenging as a project for me and for a lot of our staff as well. There were some serious problems right up front. We unfortunately, we inherited the first of the second generation of traps. So we were kind of like the guinea pigs, and that's good. I mean, that's what this whole project was about, was understanding the problems of the technology and where we can improve it. So lids coming off were one of the first problems and challenges that we faced. We were collecting that data and we were able to go back to AT straight away and say, hey, we need a solution for this. Because once the lid comes off, the rats are going to get in and start chewing the pipes for the lure. There's a whole bunch of other things that come on. So what was so good with working with auto traps was that they were very, very responsive to trying to deal with those problems. And so there's a little grip to hold the lids on, so that was done. We came up with our own little solution as well, so it was able to be knocked on the head and fixed. We had the lure issue and congealing in the pumps and the pumps failing, another problem. So went back again, worked with AT and Hayden and the guys and Kevin, and that problem was an ongoing problem, and it stayed a problem for us for quite a while. One of the other challenges was the base plate strength. So a lot of those are breaking and cracking with the force of the trap. Great trap, you need that strength, but everything around it has to be solid as rock too. We had things like rats getting stuck. So all the stuff happened, and then there's a little fix for all of these things coming through, and no amount of, this is all about planning, right? The title of what I'm trying to be talking about is about the importance of planning, but you cannot plan for this stuff because it flipping just happens and you've got to deal with it on the ground running. So I think the importance of planning is do as much as you can, but don't stop doing your project because you don't think it's perfect. You've just got to start and get into it. And these things will come up all the time. It will never end there'll be issues all the time. You just have to keep going and try and find solutions as you're going along. And that's why to talk a lot of what's happened, what's been talked about in this presentation beforehand, around that idea of being very flexible and taking that information away and making sure that you come up and try and fix these problems as you go. Possum interference. Hey, what do we got? We've got a possum guard now put into the trap. Lure bottle integrity. That was another issue. We had little holes appearing in the lure bottle. Fortunately, the whole lure bottle is now gone, so that's a new development that's happened in the last sort of 6 months with auto traps, and it's now looking really good because we've trialled some pouches and we've had huge success with those, and they've been a lot more reliable, and the lure is no longer congealing, so we're getting a whole lot of benefits that are coming out of that. We also had some challenges with the non-target species like white-eyes, so a lot of white-eyes going in and licking the bait and being killed. So that one's still a bit of a challenge, right? So for all of us, I think. Okay, so this is what, so yeah, basically I've sort of covered off this. So some of the injection mold strengthening, pump and lure issues, move to pouch, and firmware upgrades to allow 80-20 to do app testing and so forth. So this, you guys would have seen it while you're here. This is a new snazzy looking one. No lure bottle. That's a real motivator for our staff as well. So which was really, really cool. So I just wanted to give a little bit of a heads up, a little bit of a thank you too for AT to be so responsible on those issues. And good to see you, Hayden, here today. And we're going to come and see you about doing the upgrades. So look out for our quality roll with that one. So just quickly, I wanted to talk about a few things around servicing numbers. So we had 268 hectares. It was around $13 to $16 per trap per round. And so that's the best way of kind of describing it. So it's not super cheap to do that, but that was including both the labour and the lure. The in situ upgrades themselves, we had to basically replace pumps and lure bottles at the time, and that was around $70 a trap. We're expecting it to be a bit cheaper for the upgrade, not hugely, but a little bit cheaper for the next upgrade. But again, we think this next upgrade will really be worth it, so it's going to be good. So I just wanted to kind of touch on something else. So this is a couple of years old, this project now, and we had, then COVID happened, right? So we got all the stuff done, then COVID happened. And basically we got into this idea that we could do the whole forest. So that we'd done 263 hectares, we needed to do 2,000 hectares. So we applied to Jobs for Nature funding that came through with COVID. And we ended up doing this kind of like several blocks. We ended up doing about another 5 times larger than what we'd done. And we did it with bait stations. And so the reason we did it with bait stations is the application was around $700,000. We didn't choose 80-20 because what we felt was that we absolutely had to get the infrastructure in for the money, which was the cutting of the lines, because we could always go away and get more funding for an AT project, or we could go and get different bait stations or whatever, but you've got to get those lines cut to get in there. You know, we had talked about 1080 and using that. It's a forest that's right on the doorstep of Pai here. It's a little complicated. We felt that it's a lowland forest. We can get in there and do this on the ground, and we can do it better than a 3-yearly 1080 drop without the political difficulties of 1080. Don't get me wrong, we're all for 1080s, so all good. And large scale stuff, absolutely. But in this kind of sized